from the sorts of comments I get on my videos and the sorts of comments I get from my drawing students and from a lot of the drawings I see, hatching, cross-hatching continues to be a very troublesome area for so many people when they draw. And I realised that over the last 12 months, I've actually totally shifted my thinking about hatching, about cross-hatching. And as my understanding of what it is has changed, my approach to it, my thinking about it, my use of it, the effects I'm trying to create have changed in such a way that at this point, so much of what I draw, I couldn't even begin to draw without hatching. And rather than being a technique that I struggle to apply, it's become the most natural way, in fact, often the only way of creating the drawing that's now in my mind from the reference to draw. So let me explain how it works for me now as I draw this scene of some of the trees up on the north coast of New South Wales with Mount Warning there in the background. How would we draw this? Well, I know how I would probably have tried to draw it once with lots of lines and drawing the different trees and probably getting pretty tangled up in the detail, either drawing too much detail and getting tangled up, or not drawing enough detail and oversimplifying it, outlining trees and branches and whatnot, so that it ended up looking more two-dimensional, possibly more cartoon-like than I was wanting to have happen. So what's changed? Well, it's my understanding of what hatching can do that's changed. Because I usually drew architecture when I started drawing, hatching was most obviously relevant for shadows or for shade, parts of the object in shade or parts of the shadows or the shadows that the building was cast in. And really the only question was, once we knew what area was going to be shaded or shadowed, the question was, what direction do I do the hatching lines or the cross-hatching lines if I'm going to do a second or third layer of hatching over the top of the first at a different angle, which is all cross-hatching is. How can I do that? What's the direction that's right? And so often when we start drawing, we want to know what the rules are. How do I do these things and how do I apply them? And so what direction should I hatch is the constant question. Now, the answer I've always given, and it's still a good answer, is hatch in a way that goes with the underlying form of the object. So if it's a straight wall, then the hatching lines will be straight. If it's a curved surface, then the hatching lines hopefully curve with the surface. If it's grass that's in shadow, then it might be laborious but perhaps effective hatching that's very vertical, reflecting the grass that's underneath it. Or it may be a combination of those. And so that seemed to be a helpful way to think, to apply the technique of hatching to our drawing. However, as I kept drawing, I found that I was focusing when I drew less on the thought of copying what I was drawing to actually creating the effect of what I was drawing. And this began to happen as I began to shift, not completely, but back and forth between natural subjects, particularly trees and landscapes and that sort of thing, and architecture. Because when I was drawing the landscapes and the trees, I found that the idea of copying shapes really didn't come much into what I was doing. There might have been the odd tree trunk where that happened, but generally I wasn't drawing lots of lines. I was trying to create some sort of effect that I was seeing, and this was most obvious with the trees. I can't draw the leaves on a tree. There are too many. So how do I draw the tree canopy? And I think this challenge is why many people struggle to draw trees. But I came to realize what I'm trying to do is capture the overall effect of the tree canopy, capture the overall effect of the light on the surface, and to capture the, if you like, textured surface of the sunlight on the leaves. But there's no one way of doing this. It could be captured in different ways on the same tree, let alone different trees with different leaves at a different distance. So sometimes they're larger, sometimes they're smaller, and let alone the direction of the light changing or being affected by other things such as shadows being cast on them. I came to realize that really what I'm doing when I draw is putting lots of marks on the paper to capture the effect of what we're seeing. And if you look at me as I look at this drawing as I draw it now, you can see that I'm not really outlining anything much at all. I outlined those two posts sticking out of the ground down in the front, but that's pretty much it. What I'm really doing is creating the lights and darks that totally define this subject. And it's the contrast between various values, various darks and less dark or light areas against each other, which make clear the shapes, make clear the objects, make clear what we're seeing. And it's not just that we're seeing these trees, but we're seeing some closer, some further away, some much further away, and some so far away we can barely see them. Yet we're drawing them all with ink marks on the paper. And as I stopped thinking about lines and began to think more about marks, I began to do less outlining of shapes and more creating a mass of marks that when they're all put together, visually create a certain effect. And hatching, of course, is a great way to describe the sorts of marks I'm putting down and arranging on the page and on top of each other to create different values or to not create values, to leave white exposed. So you can see how I'm doing this I'm coming down behind trees where the silhouette edge is in light, and so it's a very light value. I'm not really drawing that at all. What I'm drawing is the darkness of the tree behind and bringing that darkness in to create whatever silhouette edge I'm wanting on the tree in front. And so I'm not drawing the tree, I'm actually drawing the tree behind, but I'm not really drawing the tree, I'm drawing the shadow on the tree. I'm putting whatever marks I can put on the paper to create the visual effect that we see in our reference. I'm not trying to outline much at all because there's simply not much to outline in this. And even when I do lines for the, if you like, the horizon lines, the mountain lines up the top, I do it very lightly. I don't do a solid line. I leave gaps to give the eye a chance to perceive that the edge in life changes. It might be a hard edge ridge that then softens and becomes flatter, and so the light hits it in a different way. And I might leave a millimetre gap and a very light line that doesn't strengthen for a few millimetres to indicate how a different landform is collecting the light in a different way, and that creates a different visual effect when we look at that bit of the ridge line to the bit that might be just an inch away or something. Does this make sense? I'd love to hear in your comments if this is making sense and if you can actually see it happening in this drawing. And now I'm doing a pine tree that's very common in this area, and it's behind the centre tree. But even a tree such as this, which has, if you like, globs of dark green needles on the ends of the long thin trunks, and they hang, the branches and the big globs of leaves hang in a certain way. I'm resisting the urge to start drawing the detail exactly, because that's not the overall effect. When I look at this photo, the effect at a glance is that it's still a lot of kind of silhouette. And so I see those bits more clearly, but there are lots of other parts where it's really just a darkness. And so I want to capture that. But I also want to capture the fact that in some parts the darkness is darker than other parts. So I want to create that variation as well. And it's very often that's the sort of fine tuning I do at the very end. And if you look carefully at the very end of this, just after I zip off the tape And you're watching this at 4 times normal speed. So if you want to watch me draw it at real-time speed, use the cog icon and slow the video down to a 1/4 speed, and then you can watch me actually draw it in real time. If you want to watch my mark detail in, at least for some of it, slower, and get a better sense of how the effect, the visual effect, is built up over 10, 20, 30 marks. This drawing took me 60 minutes to draw in real time. So although it looks complex, it really only took me an hour to draw, which is a really pleasing, enjoyable length of time to produce a drawing. And what I have to do is resist the urge to go too much in any one place, because the thing with values, and therefore with the hatching for the values, is we can't always tell how dark a part needs to be until we've done other parts, and we work out which part needs to be the darkest, and then we make all these adjustments all over. So at the very end, after I take off the tape, you'll see me bring the pen back and just do the last few adjustments where I just add some even darker bits into a few spots that I felt just needed to be zapped a bit, just needed to be given a bit of intensity to increase the movement of the lights and darks, and therefore of our eyes, of our viewing of the subject back and forth. So with this pine tree, I'm wanting to create the sense of the blobs, but I don't want to get caught up in starting to draw all of them, because then that becomes an exactness which doesn't actually go with the rest of the trees. You'll notice the closest tree I did, that tree that's actually got the little barricade around it to stop the cows from eating it, or pushing it over, that those leaves I've drawn in much more detail because they're closer. I've got a more detailed silhouette edge. Those leaves have a bit of a horizontal habit. I suspect they're actually made of, each leaf is made of hundreds of small leaves on a fern-like frond that sits fairly horizontally. So the important thing, though, is that I capture the general sense of those leaves, and also to make clear they're very different to the leaves of the trees around. And so the silhouette edges, using marks that create that silhouette edge, is important. And it's often done most effectively by making clear the silhouettes with the shadows behind. And now I've switched from a 0.3 to a 0.2, and now I've got a 0.1 to do Mount Warning and the ridge line across the back. And again, I'm still hatching, and even my lines are not unbroken lines. There are a series of short lines, small lines, that I think really are better described as marks, that together create a certain visual effect. Because, as I was saying before, the way that ridge line looks depends on a number of things. And I don't need to understand them to try and copy visually the effect that they do. And so at this point now, I'm working back and forth over my drawing, thinking what parts don't look so interesting, what parts don't look understandable, where do I need to add more clarity between certain objects, or do some of the trees need strengthening in some of the silhouette parts to make it clearer what they are, or do I simply need to interrupt too large an area of mid-ground value and add a few little dark areas in, because I can't obviously remove any ink to make areas lighter, so I need to go darker if I want to change, add more variety in the value. Scenes such as this, we don't want a lot of mid-values together, because that will just create a big grey blob. So that's what I'm trying to avoid. Have strong areas of light and dark right next to each other, preferably very dark and very white, which happens in a few spots. And that also makes this a great subject. But if it wasn't looking as extreme for lights and darks together as it really does in this reference photo, then I could not exaggerate, but I could adapt my scene to create, to manipulate the lights and darks to create those differences, to increase the visual drama, as I like to think of it as, increase the sort of the visual pizzazz. So we don't have this middle blandness, but we bounce from one extreme to the other, all of which tells the story of what we're looking at. And now, pretty close to the end, just making a few adjustments. and then we'll be done. So 60 minutes. How could I have drawn this in any length of time without hatching? And yet I'm not thinking about hatching at all. I'm thinking about what marks can I put on the paper and layer on each other to visually create this effect. And I think this is the crucial thing. I'm not thinking, what direction do I put the lines? I'm thinking, how do I create what I'm seeing with any marks at all? And hatching simply becomes one of the tools I might pull out and use in a certain way, or might not. Here I have the final adjustments now with the pen, and then we're done. Please hit the like button if you found this helpful. Give me a comment, let me know. Do you draw drawings like this way? How would you draw this? Or are you game to have a go? This photo reference will be on my channel community page, so why not have a go? There's nothing to lose. It's a learning adventure, drawing, and I've certainly learned a huge amount about hatching in the last 12 months. And it's really come down to changing my understanding of the drawing process. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Look, I hope this has been as helpful for you as it has been for me. And, well, why not give it a go? But look, whatever you draw and however you draw it, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.